Okay, can you all see that? AI in the future of work. So,
Yes.
Michelle asked me just to kind of run through an overview of AI in the future of work. And again, these are topics that I've been working with both in my own companies and also in my clients' companies. I work with the head of innovation of SAP, who was instrumental in the early days of growing Google. I've been, another one of my clients has been Tom Chi, the founder of Google X, who did the self-driving cars and the Google Glass projects. So it's just a little bit of my perspective and where I'm coming from. So let's just look at what can artificial intelligence already do better than humans. And 10 years ago, it could do simple math. It could never lose a tic-tac-toe. It could beat traffic with Google Maps. This is obviously not a complete list, but that was the kind of things that 10 years ago AI could do. And then just 5 years ago, already it was doing things 5 years ago that 10 years ago, leading scientists would say, some of them would say that AI could never do, that a computer could never beat, for example, the world's chess champion, because there are more possible chess moves, I think, by the 8th move than there are stars in the known universe. So, since the thinking was the way that a computer can figure out how to do something is to examine every possible outcome and then choose the best one, for anything where that's just not feasible, it was assumed that could never happen. But already it was like predicting the stock market and detecting fraud, guessing passwords, analyze those sets of data to find like insurance fraud and stuff like that. Plus, you could vacuum your room better than most humans. But now, 5 years later, it's done a lot of things that, again, 5 years ago, many people thought were going to be impossible. AI has now beat the world's Go champions, which is largely thought of as an intuitive game. There are more possible Go moves than there are atoms in the known universe. So it's simply not possible to computate them all. Computers can beat humans at online poker now, even the best poker players in the world, consistently. They can translate text into languages that they've never seen before. They can write music, drive cars, determine your mood, diagnose disease, and even, identify terrorists and win elections. If you guys have seen any of the stuff coming out of Cambridge Analytics and the role that artificial intelligence, machine learning, neural nets, and big data played in both the Brexit and the Trump campaigns. So that's kind of interesting, just that there's this trend of, it will never be able to do that. And sure enough, now it can do that. Also, what's interesting is the investment. This is coming from data on Silicon Valley-based venture investment. So it was less than $1 billion 10 years ago invested in AI companies. And it's, not only growing, but the rate at which it's growing is growing, because it's 8.5 billion is more than 4 times what it was 5 years ago. And I think this is also interesting because all of the list of what it can do now is a function of the 2.2 billion that was invested 5 years ago. So not only will we progress along the linear path, but it's kind of an asymptotic path towards infinity, given that the number of people who are trying to figure out AI problems today is greater and greater. And that is, in addition to all the internal investments, it's the number one internal investment priority for Google, Microsoft, SAP, and Facebook. And that's just to name a few. And obviously, these guys spend a lot of money and a lot of time trying to figure out problems. So it's happening really fast, and it just leads us to think that the fundamental error that we can make is to say a computer will never be able to blank. If you find yourself saying that, a computer will never be able to blank, just know that whatever you said probably in 5 years will be found not to be true. It may not happen in 5 years, but it's certainly going in that direction. After I wrote this presentation, I found out that Ford announced that they're skipping phase 3 autonomous cars, meaning in 2021, which is like, if you have a freshman in high school as a child right now, it's the year they graduate high school. In 2021, there will be autonomous cars by Ford on the road without steering wheels or pedals. So that's happening fast. Although this isn't the first time we've all had this question about the future of work. Before it was called the Industrial Revolution, in like the 1821, there was a lot of talk about the machinery question. the essence of the machinery question is, if we have machines doing all the work of men, of course, then it was men, then what will happen to all the men? And that was kind of the fear. And looking a little more deeply at the phenomenon, there actually was a financial crisis that arose out of the Industrial Revolution, and it had to do with a widening of the wealth gap. And it's because automation was growing faster than innovations in education. If the person knows how to work on a factory line and assemble two pieces, and then a machine can do that instead of the person, you have to teach the person how to do something that's useful at the same rate that their job is replaced. Otherwise, you get joblessness and poverty, which happened. So between 1850 and 1900, you had this gap between automation before education started to catch up. But right now, we have a much bigger gap. So if you look at 1980 to projected 2030, the gap between the speed of innovation and automation versus the speed of innovation in education is much, much, much wider than anything we experienced in the Industrial Revolution, which means that you start to get smart people and billionaires talking about the universal basic income. There are experiments right now in Africa, and there's been recent experiments in Canada about a kind of a state-sponsored, everybody gets enough money to live, which is an interesting theory, but in order for it to work, it has to be truly universal globally and not just locally. Also, income, which is only one benefit of working. So a universal basic income will provide the bread, but not meaning, because what we do for a living also gives us our sense of purpose, or at least it's that serves as that role for many, 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 many people. So we have a crisis when we have a crisis of work. We have not just a crisis of income and of subsistence, but also of identity and meaning, which means that the potential AI crisis or the future of work is actually a crisis of education. And the kind of education that we're going to need on a broad scale is going to follow the kind of automation that we're able to do. So it starts with repetition. That's the first thing we're able to automate is repetition, and then computation, and then decision making, and then influence, and then innovation, and then insight, and at the highest level, art. So this is sort of the sequence that things are going to be automated in, and it's therefore the sequence where we are going to need the most education. And right now, we're kind of at the decision-making phase, right, where repetition and computation are pretty much handled by AI currently. Repetition was handled by machinery a long time ago. Computation started with computers. Decision-making is starting now. Influence is next. So, the education focus to keep up with the demand that the AI crisis is going to create is going to be really around decision-making and influence right now, and then innovation and insight later. But who's going to do this education, right? It's clearly not going to be the governments. We've learned that it's not going to be the universities. You can tell that because university graduate currently cannot get a job at Starbucks. So that's pretty obviously not the solution. NGOs have proven that they're pretty useless. The UN, the World Health Organization, so sort of multinational organizations have also proven that they're pretty ineffectual. And we know we can't rely on the parents because they don't have the education themselves that they need to give the people who are coming into the workforce without job opportunities now, which leaves companies. So the only ones left, I think, are the ones holding power, and that's currently in our culture, the companies. So I think that's kind of my overview is AI is happening faster than we can imagine. It is going to create a crisis of work. It's a crisis of subsistence and income, but it's also a crisis of meaning, of purpose. The solution to both of those problems is education, and the person or the entities that where it will fall on their shoulders to fill that gap, both as I think an obligation, but definitely as an opportunity, are companies. And so I think the winners, the biggest winners in the AI revolution that's already begun will be the people who can innovate education and make it as easy as possible for someone with one set of skills to learn another set of skills, following that tree. that's my overview. I try to keep it short and sweet. I don't know, Michelle, if you have any other questions.
Thanks, Brian. That's awesome. If you could pass host back to me, and just to let you guys know for some context, Brian is the guy, in Silicon Valley that a lot of these big companies bring in to kind of help them wrap their heads around innovation from the perspective of, what kind of a leadership team and what kind of an executive team do you need to actually affect this kind of change. There's a lot of changing ideas out there about what it is to be an executive these days. It used to just be about, the quality of your ideas. And now that we've got this kind of intense technology that can rebut about a lot of those great ideas, what is it now? And what do we have to do? And Brian's really amazing at bringing that to bear. Okay, so Brian, I'm going to request, I guess, let's see. Did you make me host? Oh, claim host. I can do that. There we go. Great. So let me go about here and share my screen with you guys. All right, so we're going to move on from here and ask the pivotal question here, right? So how do we fit in? So we're these direct sellers and we see this world of change and the whole employment and work landscape shifting right beneath our feet. How do we capitalize on this most? So most of you guys know me, so I'm not going to go through this because just about everybody on this call knows who I am. If you don't, you can get this deck later and look at me. I'm not going to talk about myself too much. But what do we really do as a direct selling space that makes us uniquely positioned here, right? Well, first of all, we bring socioeconomic empowerment to millions of people. That's one of the things that we've always done and we've been great at. So many people in the world that already haven't had much opportunity can take advantage of a great opportunity from many of the companies or all the companies in our space, just about, with some exceptions. And Brian brought up a couple of interesting ideas. He talked about meaning. He talked about, obviously, the need for income. And he talked about influence, right? That next level. And if you really think about it, these are kind of three things that we're already amazing at, right? We invented cause-driven marketing, right? So the meaning is there. I mean, very few direct selling companies will survive without some kind of cause to fuel their field with, right? So the meaning is definitely part of how we already do business. Income is already there, right? Modest income is achievable. And one of the things that we think about with automation as a benefit is when you take the cost of labor out of producing a lot of goods and services, the costs go way down. Now, they don't go to zero. So these people that are ejected out of the market still need to make some money. But in this future, we can see the prices of things going way down. So how much they need for subsistence should also go down. So the amount of income we can offer more people, it doesn't have to be so much to be able to really make a difference for people in this future. And of course, regarding influence, well, I mean, we teach people influence every day, right? I mean, selling is influence, recruiting is influence, servicing your customer is influence. So these are the three things that are just kind of, I think, part of the DNA of direct selling. Now, if we want to get into asking ourselves the questions, how do we position ourselves to gain most, and what can we gain from the situation of people leaving the market? I think we need to go all the way back to one of my heroes, who's Elon Musk, the founder of PayPal, Tesla, SpaceX, SolarCity, legendary billionaire entrepreneur and innovator. And one of my favorite quotes from him is, "Don't just follow the trend." You may have heard me say that it's good to think in terms of the physics approach of first principles, which is, rather than reasoning by analogy, you boil things down to the most fundamental truths you can imagine, and you reason up from there. So direct selling, as with over 100-year history, has so many ideas and conventional wisdoms and preconceptions of what it's supposed to be piled on top of these first principles that I'm going to invite us to just take all of those away and ask ourselves, what are the first principles of direct selling? Well, basically, what do we do really? Well, from an economic perspective, the first thing we do is we make people the center of a good or service in their community. The second thing we do is we keep money at the bottom. So basically, we return a substantial portion, usually somewhere between 35 and 50% of every dollar that's generated, back to that community that generated it through our compensation plans, which is a major problem already right now with income inequality. So we're already one of the few markets or channels that brings money down to the bottom in real substantial amounts. And lastly, we provide a flexible, low-risk income opportunity, something that's also going to be really needed. So I want to start getting into the idea of what we can consider, but we got to remember that no problem can be solved from the level of consciousness that created it, right? It's classic Albert Einstein quote. And so what I mean by that is, as we get into this discussion, we may bring up some ideas that may be considered completely taboo, or like, whoa, your first instinct might be like, whoa, 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 no, we don't do that, right? But maybe we do, maybe we don't. But let's go back to first principles and reason up from there in this conversation. So I want to bring up a couple of ideas, and then I'm going to open it up on the next slide to conversation. So what are some of the ideas that we can challenge about direct selling? And again, these may be good ideas, these may be crap ideas, but it might be something that we want to just consider, right? So the first challenge is, does everybody really have to sell? The gig economy seems to have proven that that may not be true. Do we maybe need to think about customer acquisition or multi-channel, as some companies are proving to be successful with? Do we really need such deep and complicated complaints? Or really, how do we gain mass appeal? And I want to kind of dig into this a little bit more, because as a direct selling channel, if we're going to be able to absorb as many of these displaced people as possible, we're going to have to get over some of our PR challenges and some of the misconceptions around direct selling and really gain mass appeal if we have a chance of becoming really kind of a potential cornerstone or pillar of the new economy. So we have to ask ourselves the question, if we want to gain mass appeal, maybe we need our compensation to be simpler and easier to understand. Maybe we want to look at an option to service and sell, and maybe not have to sell in order to be involved in our company. Uber drivers don't sell, for example. Maybe we need to look at discovering and embracing multiple different paths to success. A lot of companies train the field that there's one way to do it, and if you're not doing it our way, we don't really want much to do with you. And then, of course, we need to really understand our people better than they understand themselves. And AI and machine learning has proven to be able to do that. Brian brought up in the election and across all different kinds of categories, AI is proving to really start to understand people way better than they understand themselves, thereby knowing what they're going to do and being able to serve them and give them better experiences. So, of course, the last one is we've got to figure out this regulatory situation. I call it making the FTC our BFF. So let's move into conversation. I have 4 overall topics, and I'm open to you guys, bringing in whatever you like. But the first thing I'd like to talk about is getting out of the bubble. So direct selling for many years has been kind of in this bubble. We keep ourselves very separate from mainstream. Our technology providers aren't really servicing many people outside of direct selling in most cases. Our conferences isolate ourselves with just each other. Very, very few direct selling companies participate in anything outside of the direct selling industry or as part of real mainstream culture, which leads to our challenges with industry PR, which also has challenges on embracing modern practices because we're not involved with the rest of the world and keeping up with innovation very much. And of course, the gig economy has kind of come up as this somewhat competitor, somewhat synonym to what we do. And what are the implications of that? So I'm going to flash a bunch of kind of ideas here that we can talk about. But let's maybe start with getting out of the bubble and talking about engaging in policy and big business discussions. So, for example, World Economic Forum. How come this 100 million people in the world that are given opportunities that are really rare and hard to find aren't never talked about at the World Economic Forum? How come we're not in that? Another great example of someone getting out of the mainstream is Jeff Bell from Legal Shield. They launched a new product at South by Southwest, probably one of the most mainstream, events that you can have, right? And you've got a direct selling company launching a new product there. That's really interesting and new, an example of that. And of course, bringing this idea to governments is another thing. So I can kind of go on and on here, but I want to invite you guys to speak. So if anyone has anything that they want to share about any of these ideas, speak up. That's why we're gathered together. I want to think about, what do we need to do as an industry? What are your thoughts about how we need to transform to be able to take advantage of this, what I think is an opportunity? Or maybe you don't, right? So who'd like to share something on this?